and we're going to start recording. But before I start recording, just want to say thank you for being here. And we're going to run for an hour and a half. It's an open flow discussion. We do ask you to say 5 to 7 minutes of prepared remarks. And prepared remarks mean what you think about the future. Again, our question is, I'm going to start recording now at this point. Our question, our organizing question for the day is the future of the American dream. Emancipation still coming. And we began the day with a robust conversation on the legacy on which we stand, right? And we look back, the Haitians in the American Revolution, the linkages and the lessons learned from the earlier abolitionist movements that had success in the West Indies, but weren't making it in the British colonies in America, right? We're all English colonies, not British, English colonies at the time. And so, they were all like friends, trading. Slaves were going from ships from Rhode Island to Africa to pick up slaves in Antigua and Barbados, bring them to South Carolina, come back, bring back the rum, the pork, the sawfish. I mean, it was a really three-way trade, including the Americas. And people don't often realize the ships didn't just go Caribbean, Africa, England. They also came to America at some of the times. And then we move from that to the issue of justice and future of justice. And we had 3 judges on and one state's attorney from Maryland, and they talked about basically their career, but we did touch on issues pertaining to our responsibility to understand how the law affects everything in our lives: housing, the right to work, the right to hear, policing, the right to understand how courts work, the right to be on a jury. All these things were kind of put on the table. How do we prepare to be emancipated and understanding our human rights in a culture that is about rule of law, right? From there, we moved to healthcare futures, and we had a very high energy discussion on post-COVID world, what we learned, what we didn't learn, and the need for us to become more responsible and recognize that our freedoms can be at risk. We're not free to do a lot when it was COVID. So what does it mean in an era where personalized medicine could take place when we still don't have universal healthcare, even though in the time of COVID, we had universal vaccines and universal other things? Why can't it be part of the new normal for other things to be universally available? How do we organize to go forward? Then we moved to education. We had a conversation about rights to education. How do we teach history? How do we teach our teachers to be prepared to have a different kind of education? How do we prepare the young ones so that 2065, 200 years from now, race won't matter in the same way, or will it? Are we at this turn where we see the rise in racial violence and hatred? Are we to be lulled into a sense of false security because so many young people, quote unquote, are woke and we're out there marching saying Black Lives Matter? What does it mean when the leaders of Black Lives Matter have betrayed us by their theft of resources, right? Betrayed those of us who believed in them, for example. What does it mean to remove the let's say the slogan from the 3 leaders and to have it continue without them? All of these things are part of the education. How do we decolonize our mind so we're free thinking? We won't be able to say accept wrongdoing from politicians or leaders simply because they're Black. We give them a pass. All of these things are part of the decolonization process. And now we come to economic futures. Really the linchpin of why I even decided this was important today. Because after seeing a couple of people kind of crying blues on LinkedIn about the beginning of a creep into this commercialization of Juneteenth, I realized better for us to step out and claim the day than allow the merchandise to begin to claim the day for us. What does it look like? What are the images we're going to allow into our house as memorabilia of our hard-fought freedoms? Freedoms that belong to all of us, whether we were born here or not, because the experience of slavery in the Americas is universally felt by all of us whose grandparents and great-grandparents were born on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. So with that, I'd like to give the floor, first of all, to Austin Thompson to start. I will then ask Lorian Sales to go second. So we'll have the rose between the two thorns, or the two roses between the thorn. I don't know, we'll decide. I'm going to be politically incorrect. People know I'm irreverent, so whatever. And I will end with Frederick Gardner. You only have about 5 minutes to make your statement. We don't want this to be a lecture or a preaching. We really want to have a conversation. After you speak, then we're going to ask some questions. I'll have some questions. Anybody from the floor can ask questions. You might have questions of each other, but we're going to have a rich discussion. And we want to leave here with some potential action items that you can take back, that we will write up if we find something really exciting. And we know how politics work. Sometimes you have to be told that somebody said that they want this for you to do it. So see if we can get the Caribbean community in your neck of the woods in Georgia and here in Maryland, where I am, to start, putting it on your posts so you can be seen to be responsive to what people are calling for. So with that, Austin Thompson, I let you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, good. My name is Austin Thompson. I am a newly elected city councilman with the city of Lawrenceville, the first man of African descent elected to the city council in the 200-year anniversary of the city. I am honored to not just be the first African man of African descent elected, but to represent the Guyanese and Caribbean community as a city councilman here in Lawrenceville. We are in the month of June, where we were celebrating the Juneteenth anniversary, the emancipation, or I should say the remaining emancipation of our African brothers and sisters on June 19th, 1865, as Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. And it wasn't until 2.5 years later that those in Galveston, Texas, received the notice that, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Here we are now at advanced, or 157 years into the future, past 1865. And we are looking at the seriousness and the investments being made into the African-American community. And pardon me if I use the term African, because we are African people. I don't usually like to use the terms African-American, African-Caribbean, Afro-Latino, Afro-European. We're African people. So I will use the term African to represent us and to recognize us heretofore. So for we as African people, building communities and looking at our economic future, where it lies in technology, where it lies in financial management, the creation of wealth, generational wealth for us as a people, not only on the continent of Africa, but here in the United States of America, where we reside. And looking at the totality of this challenge of how do we build wealth? How do we move forward from where we are 157 years removed, right, from June 19th, 1865, to take a look at how we've come past Reconstruction, how we've come past the Civil Rights Movement, how we've come past all of those challenging times in the history of the African and American in America, and how do we move past those challenging times to build that future that we deserve for ourselves. Many of us, like my family, we've immigrated from from Guyana, South America. Many of us immigrated from the Caribbean, and we've come here to America. And we've placed ourselves in a system of assimilation and going to work for a 9 to 5 and until we retire, but yet still we've never really focused on building that firm, strong economic base, through entrepreneurship. And as an entrepreneur myself, and as one who worked with small business owners and entrepreneurs, I have a passion for driving that forward, and to identify opportunities for entrepreneurs, and how do small business owners develop and establish and develop sustainable pathways for themselves in growing their businesses, and using those experiences to grow economic wealth, to grow generational wealth for themselves. This is something that when we look to the future, when we look at what do we want for our children, what do we want for our grandchildren, and so on and so forth. How do we build that economic future for them? Is it through STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math? Is it through financial education? Is it through the investment in business development and growth? We have all these opportunities. We have all these different options in which we can grow wealth for our generations to come. We're seeing the dynamics of economic development on the continent of Africa itself, fueled and driven by young people, by young minds, young innovators, young decision makers, young disruptors. We're seeing that on the continent of Africa. I'm seeing it, and I'm actually helping to play my part in that. But I also want to see that here for our Africans in America, and how we're building a strong future for those to come after us. Now, I know we're going to get into a discussion on this. So again, my name is Austin Thompson, newly elected council member for the city of Lawrenceville in Georgia, originally from Georgetown, Guyana, South America. And I thank Dr. Nelson and all those who play a significant role in bringing this program to the forefront. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Austin Thompson, for getting us off to the races. We pass the baton to Lorian Sales to continue the race.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nelson, and greetings to my fellow panelists. My name is Lorian Sales, and I am a former Gaithersburg council member and candidate on the ballot, less than 30 days away from our county council at large midterm primary elections. And so I'm going to discuss a bit about the economic futures of Black America in light of the recent recognition of Juneteenth as a national holiday, 2 years post-pandemic. What have we learned, and what our future looks like? And so a little bit about the city of Gaithersburg. The city of Gaithersburg is the most diverse city in the nation. By Wallet Hub, year after year, we get that recognition. We're also the biotech corridor of the region, and we have about 5 different biopharmaceutical companies that are all creating the medications for the pandemic and other medications as well. And so this biotech corridor has actually grown since the pandemic, and we've been used as a model for how we operate our economy throughout the pandemic. In 2017, I became the first African-American elected to the city council. And following that historic endeavor, I was appointed to the National League of Cities Community and Economic Development Federal Advocacy Committee. And so, Councilmember Thompson, I hope you are engaged with NLC and the NLC's National Black Caucus of local elected officials as well. Very good resources for African-American municipal leaders. So as I mentioned, in our community, we also are distinguished because we have zero debt. And so when I became chair of the Community and Economic Development Committee, we hosted the annual meeting in 2019 to talk about a range of issues from our affordable housing program, our toolbox grant program for small businesses and large businesses, and also how we are retaining, a safe community that allows our residents to thrive and live closer to where they work. Not every jurisdiction has the benefits of a thriving economy. And so we think about this thriving economy in the lens of convenience, how the small business community is being supported, access to capital, opportunities for ownership, and really being an incubator for new businesses and innovation as well. But we're also looking at the economy in light of the last 2 years of the pandemic, where we've seen significant job loss in the African American community. We have historically seen data on the underperforming public schools that serve students of color, and the gaps that we saw, most significant gaps in digital infrastructure for students of color to access educational supports during the pandemic. So all of these lacks actually exacerbated the learning loss of our children, especially our children of color. And so with a concentration of African Americans already in low-wage jobs, years of redlining that totally, eliminated us from certain communities and certain advantages, regardless of the sacrifices that we made to our country in service. We were still not looked at with opportunities to have wealth and build wealth within our community and our families. And so in light of the last 2 years, it's funny that we've seen, this enthusiasm into the Black culture and commoditization of the Black culture with Juneteenth. And so how are we ensuring that we are not just being a commodity with the Juneteenth holiday, but we're actually looking at true economic shifts to reform the economic outcomes for Black Americans. And so as we are looking to transition out of the pandemic, there has to be an equitable recovery. An equitable recovery doesn't always look fair and equal. It looks at where are the needs, where have the disparities existed, and how can we create more supports to ensure economic prosperity for our residents of color. Our first speaker mentioned that, you look at Black America as all Africans, and in the Montgomery County, we have an Office of Community Partnerships where we have basically given all of the different segments of our population a platform to advise the county council on issues that are important to them. So we have an Office of Interfaith, we have an African Advisory Committee, a Caribbean Advisory Committee, and an African American Committee. We have the Latino Committee, the Asian Committee, and all of these residents advise the county on their priorities. We're the largest block of represented in this county, and yet it's not reflected in the policies that result in access to capital, access to contracts, home ownership, and other wealth building investments. So following this pandemic, what are some priorities we want to have? We want to ensure that we can stabilize families throughout the crisis. Our rental assistance program was so important to help keep people housed. The greatest pathway to building wealth is home ownership. And so housing stability is going to be key. And I'm glad that our county is making increased investments. The city of Gaithersburg ensures that any new development that comes to the city has at least 15% of its residential units committed to affordable housing. 7.5% are workforce and 30% are at 30% of area median income. We also have to create new job opportunities. We have the Office of Workforce Development. We can have a thriving economy if we have an educated workforce, a skilled workforce that's prepared to meet the needs of a 21st century economy. And so what sort of environment are we ensuring to make sure that our Black residents have access to the trainings and job opportunities to help them live thriving and self-sufficient existence? We also have to promote home ownership, as I mentioned, so entrepreneurs can live closer to where they work. Small businesses, as we know, are the backbone of our economy and have the employ the most people in our community. We have to ensure that we have reliable transportation infrastructure. A lot of businesses will move to where it's convenient for them to navigate from an airport or within the community. And so ensuring that the infrastructure is up to date and working with our federal and our local partners to ensure that we have the infrastructure we need to support our residents and to support a thriving economy. We also have to look at our wages. If we actually kept up with inflation, our wages would be closer to $24 an hour versus the $15 an hour. And if you go even further south, I believe the minimum wage is still around $7.50 to $10 as you go further south. And so ensuring that we as elected officials and policymakers prioritize, a living wage, support labor unions to support that people can live and retire with dignity is going to be key. And so I know we're going to get into a greater discussion, but, wealth is, can be looked at across a few different lenses, because we have higher rates of health disparities, that causes an even greater a burden on our financial resources. And what are we doing to ensure that we have greater access to better health care, greater job opportunities to really have wealth in this community? And so looking forward to the questions and the continued discussion. Thank you.
All right. And now we move to Mr. Frederick Gardner, who is the city manager. So that's an appointed position, not elected, in the city of Stockbridge in Georgia.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson, for the invitation to participate in this wonderful forum. And thank you to my panelists. I think they pretty much stole a lot of my talking points, but I'm gonna work around where I think there were things that we could discuss in terms of the gaps, and as we talk about the future of economic development, specifically as it relates to our communities and to our people. So I'm originally from Nassau, Bahamas, born and bred, came to the United States to further my education, and like many of us, we never went back permanently. We made a home here in the United States. And for me, my home for the last 22 years has actually been the city of Stockbridge. I've been blessed to work as a city manager in 3 communities in the South Metro Atlanta area, the city of East Point for the last 7 years. Prior to that, the city of McDonough, Georgia, which is here in Henry County where I currently reside, and the city of Stockbridge. But my background was in urban and regional planning rep, rose through the ranks all the way to director in multiple states, North and South and Midwest. But I will say part of what, not to go back through the history of the Juneteenth and everything, but more so from the standpoint of what we as local leaders in our communities can do to assist and move forward economic development as it relates to our peoples. Key to that is, we've always been a people with strong economic and entrepreneurial spirits. I think Mr. Thompson said he's an entrepreneur. And that's always been key to our success as people, and not just going through the corporate America. And as Marcel said, I mean, small businesses are the backbone of this country, and how we allow for us to get involved in that entrepreneurial spectrum, I think plays a key role to long-term wealth for us. And as local government, what can we do at the state, local, and even the federal level to assist? I think pre-COVID, the doors were open for some economic activities through the Small Business Administration, but even at the local level. And for me as a implementer, more so of policies that come from council, from my elected officials, and making sure that we as the staff accomplish those goals and to the vision of our communities. We work with our local and our federal, as well as nonprofit partners, to bring access and assistance to local businesses in our communities. And so with that, I think part of what we have to talk about is moving post-COVID, or even during COVID, we saw a rush of resources that came from the federal government in terms of funding. Whether it was for families as it relates to rental assistance, and that was a program we did in the city of East Point, which I just left 6 months ago, but also to the point of small business assistance, utility assistance for our residents to relax as much of that burden. But we went even a step beyond that during COVID. We went to areas where local governments typically didn't roam, food assistance programs. And that program continues today, where we provide our low-income residents and seniors, and most of the cities I've served to say has been majority African-American. We serve them with opportunities for food, services, and even to the point for those ambulatory residents, we drove the foods to their homes. But for the most part, we took our rec center and provide foods. Even here in the Stockbridge, one of my council members here runs a food program whereby providing food for our low and moderate income residents who are still struggling. So as local government, we've taken on some additional roles that we typically don't get involved in as local governments, to provide for those least of us. And 9 times out of 10, they look just like us. I think one of the biggest issues that we're looking at now, I think that's going to have a huge effect on economic development, is homelessness. And what are we at the local level are doing towards addressing homelessness? Because we're starting to see more and more people showing up around food stores, around major intersections, along the highways, with tent cities, cardboard cities, right? I mean, this is stuff I saw back home in the Bahamas, certain portions of it. But now, I see a lot of that here. And so how do we address that and make, and that's the other side of the equation, mental health, right? Which is a huge portion of that. But where do we roam as local governments to making sure that we are able to provide the services to our residents and businesses to have thriving communities where people would love to come work, live, and play. And as we said before, making it affordable, because we see that housing prices are rising. And how do we deal with that around zoning and development codes? And that's been a strong fight for us here in the city of Stockbridge in terms of providing opportunities for mixed use development, when we talk about having the opportunity to live and work in the same area. But as a suburban city, and I think Mr. Thompson can attest to this. The issue then becomes transportation, right? Because a lot of our jobs that we tend to see now are rooted in the new economic development realities, which is either big box distribution, which we have a lot here in Henry County because we are so flat and we have about 6 or 7 exits off of I-75, our proximity to Norfolk Southern Railroad, as well to the proximity to the airport. And so how do we bring in those type of industries that reflects our values as a community and become community partners? And then how do we make sure that our children are actually meeting the new requirements for these facilities? Because a lot of them are no longer just brawn, they're rooted around technology, right? When you talk about automation and how do you learn to use that computer system to drive, how they move logistics around that building and then outside of that building. So making sure that our kids, as they come up, especially those who don't want to go to traditional college level, are preparing themselves for this new work environment. And for many of us, the new work environment is working from home, right? And how do we provide that broadband access in many of our communities so that folks who have the opportunity to work from home will have the access to high-speed internet and not only high-speed internet, sustained high-speed internet and sustained power, right? Because that's part of the other part of that equation, because if you don't have power, hence goes, you can't connect. And in some of our communities, we tend to be straddled with longer outages than some communities when we have storms and we look at who's restored versus who's not in a timely manner. That plays a huge role. And I don't think anybody's ever looked at that, but that's something somebody needs to look at as a study. So I hope some young college-age kid decide to write a paper on that, because I think that's a huge area of disparity that is not being discussed. But I'll close with that so that we can get to the meat of the matter, which is the Q&A, and allow for us to share our thoughts and ideas, and hopefully at the end of this, we'll have some good data points for folks to move forward on.
So awesome. Thank you so much for getting us started. So lots of issues on the table. Economic development is a broad issue. There's a personal side of it, but the personal and the community kind of going hand in hand. If there are no jobs, then you can't live where you live. If there are no industries that are putting stuff in, then you can't work where you live. And so all of these things are part of what goes into making a community thriving. My theory of change is called the Smart Futures Framework. My book came out last year in the middle of COVID. I was asked to write it. And something I've been talking about for several years prior. And Essence Smart, and this is relevant because we've been talking about smart cities a lot. So I decided that really got me very irritated, right? So I said, I'm going to have to start educating people, because they think because they put a, fancy traffic light in and it senses this and everything is smart. But the city and the things might be smart, but the people are still stupid. Life is still hard. And actually, we're really very, dumb about certain things. So the Essence Smart normally stands for, how is your thing sustainable? But we're talking about housing solutions for affordable housing. We're talking about transportation systems. We're talking about making a decision to, build a new road or a new park or new green space, new schools. All of these things are designing of policies or programs or plans, strategic plans. First question everybody must ask is issue of sustainability. Then we have the metrics. We have been brought up on this metric of, GNP and GDP and profit, etc. But are cities ready to move away to more inclusive prosperity metrics, right? So in Maryland, for example, we've been toying around with the progressive, some of the indicators. One of the few, I think it's 2 or 3 states have it. I can't remember the real term right now, but it's some progressive indicators that look at the inequality gap, right? We know inequality is a problem. But with all the newfangled theories coming out and a new economic movement, I'm wondering if maybe Black leaders like yourself should not be thinking about, new metrics that take us into the 21st century. metrics on well-being, metrics on vulnerability indices, metrics on, how if you're near a floodplain, for example, how that might affect how you're, what does prosperity look like for more people? So what about the metric question? How meaningful are the metrics you're using to measure the success of your community? Where are the gaps? A is about the agency of the stakeholders in the system, which are consumers and their citizens, and they're one and the same. Most citizens are consuming something, but then some of them are in civil society, some of them are in the private sector, some of them are also elected officials. So, and some of them wear multiple hats. They're all these things. So what agencies do people have in your communities? As we look to a 21st century, we're talking about e-government. How are we building in e-government, e-governance, which is participatory, not just e-government? Are we thinking about giving people in your community agency, 1 and 2, if they even get it? Do they have the common sense to know what to do with it? I mean, if you give a gun to the wrong person or a hammer to the wrong person, it's a weapon. So are you educating people to understand what e-governance is and understanding that the future in the metaverse cannot live by the same rules of a pre-metaverse world, right? R is resilience. Okay, you're telling me that more people are homeless, more people are, in problems financially because of COVID. Well, clearly there was not a lot of economic resilience built into our systems. Most of us are what we call wage slaves, meaning that we have no inherited wealth. And we probably may have about, maybe if we're lucky, 3 months of savings, if we're lucky. But the majority of people who are working, big class people, don't have more than 3 months of savings. And quite frankly, it is our intention that our pension is supposed to afford us the lifestyle to which we might have become accustomed while we were still working. When property taxes go up, it's not going to be doing exactly the same thing. So this idea of retirement with dignity and aging with dignity, aging in place, is this on your radar, on your city council radar, your personal radar? What does resilience look like for you as a leader in order to kind of bring this into being, into a larger picture? And finally, T is the transformative use of technology, and that's self-explanatory. So I go through all this to say, any question I ask is probably based on some version of that in the back of my head, right? And so when I hear you talk about affordable housing, and I'm saying, well, if, people who work for the city, the teachers, the nurses, the firemen, etc., can't afford to live there, have to drive 1 hour to work, live in some far off rural county. That's a problem because we're not measuring what matters, right? So you're going to have to do some homework. I don't know with whom. Try to find the people in your school or somewhere to move you forward. But my question is, in the post-COVID world of your world, when you're around tables, looking at budgets, and I start with Mr. Gardner because, and obviously Austin, because you're currently in a position where you actually have to come up with something, right? One is appointed, one is elected, but you're both in Georgia, which has its own issues, as we well know. But in post-COVID Georgia, where, last 2 years have been rough for you in terms of election-wise and all this drama. How are you at the local level trying to sort of steer an economic ship through this rough sea, right? But keep it steady enough to travel through the waters. Yes, it might bounce upon a lot. We see we're going through really high interest rates right now. So buying a house now might be impossible for some people. How are you looking at working with maybe some of the HBCUs, or are you looking at working with some of the HBCUs in your community that might have economics department to kind of really think through what should be something new that might be able to be put on the table as opposed to trying the same old things? Just give me some of your sense of how you're looking at it. Have you been looking at it? Will you consider looking at it? What are your thoughts around this question about solving some of these problems? I mean, the homeless thing is really embarrassing. America shouldn't have homeless people in the numbers of which we have there. Mm-hmm. Right? This area where we live, DC, is ridiculous, the housing price. So this is going to become a bigger and bigger crisis because paychecks are not keeping up. And yes, it's true. We have too many large houses. None of us, including myself, need to move into smaller houses. But you can't change everything in one fell swoop. How are we going to address the housing crisis and put hardworking people, it's not lazy people now, hardworking people who, because they lost their jobs, suddenly find themselves homeless. They've never had this crisis before. Here they are.
I will say from a local government standpoint, from a city manager standpoint, obviously, this economic environment is almost the flip side of what we saw in 2010, 2011, 2009. Now we're looking at, what does it cost to provide services to our residents? And how do we balance that with the revenues that we get in without creating an additional impediment through tax increases, right? At the local level. And for us, the blessing for us in the city of Starbridge is, we do not have a property tax, and our majority of our revenues is predicated on sales tax, which in an inflation has a huge a huge impact, right? Because if this continues to linger anywhere above 5% or higher, and people start to find alternative ways of spending money or not spending money, and as they prioritize where they spend, that becomes an issue for us, because then we see lower revenues. And then we're in a position of, okay, for a community, how do we now balance, lower revenues around still being able to provide the level of service that our residents demand? And that's always been the catch. And what do we cut? For a city like ours, we're starting a new police department, right? Which is a huge burden on our general fund. But most of the residents support the need for that police service because we've been serviced by the county police for the last 45 years. And so that's a burden in how we provide that service. And yes, we were blessed with the American Recovery Act funds to move our police department forward, but that money goes away. As it relates to homelessness, the big issue we have is, because we are not a social service entity per se, our goal is now, how do we work with those entities that is their primary or their core of their business, and where do we fit in that gap, right, as a city? And if we have to find a new way to fit in that gap, how do we evaluate, what's best for us as a city and what we're capable of? Because unlike a private industry or a nonprofit to some degree, we're curtailed by law as to what we can do. And so we have to find those gaps where the law allows us to be able to work with those nonprofit entities and coordinate better with our state folks as it relates to homelessness, which is, a lot of it is centered, yes, around the economic situation that we're in, but also by some of these folks veterans dealing with mental issues, and how do we address that? Because our capacity level is only so big. For us in this upcoming year, I'm talking to my council about, we've had some big ticket wish lists, and, is this the time, for us to be looking at this big ticket wish list versus where do we see ourselves falling into having to pay for the debt service on this thing with an economy that might be going in the wrong direction. And so we're having that fresh discussion in a couple of weeks as it relates to, our spending priorities. And then as we get into our budget preparation, in light of what we see now, and I think this has a huge political wheel around it, gas prices being what they are, food prices being what they are, the potential for gas to go above $5 a gallon. I mean, you're hearing the scare tactics that in a market that's predicated now in every shape and fashion on speculation, which is crazy. I have a recent college graduate son that's looking for a job in DC, and I'm amazed that, for a 1-bedroom apartment, it's more than I pay for mortgage on my house, which is crazy. $2,100 plus a separate parking fee, just to be in an area that's desirable. And so that goes back to, even for our young kids coming out of school, there's a burden, let alone families, right? The glory, I think, in our community here is, how do we evaluate our current housing stock? And I think a lot of governments should take this into account, and they should do a housing study in their community, especially now, to determine, where we are along that spectrum of housing, whether we're high on the low income side as we know it, or we're high on the high income side with the need for low. And then how do we put policies in place to address that gap? That's going to be key for a lot of communities. And it's intentional for mayor and councils to want to do that, and to provide zoning that says we're going to provide for affordable housing in a project when somebody actually does it. And I don't know if it's the same in Maryland, but in Georgia, we have low-income tax credit projects, developments, and a lot of communities shun those because they feel like it's bringing the less desirable to their communities. But in some cases, it's allowing some folks already in your communities to be able to get into home ownership to some degree, or have access to home. And that's a part we can play as it relates to making that relationship between those type of developers and then the market rate developers, so that we have an equal balance.
Mr. Thompson, you have anything to add to that? Because, I've heard about things like community development grants, but I'm wondering how many of us really understand those vehicles that have been created, but we're not really trained. We've had these ideas. I mean, sometimes churches have these ideas, or, even groups of friends have these ideas, but we're not really educated to understand these special zoning things that give you the opportunity to, as you say, build real estate, support housing development. In your area, do you have the same housing problem? And are you looking at some new models? Looking to the future, are you trying to tap into the tiny house movement, for example? That's a big deal. Or houses on trailers that you can convert into something else. How are you beginning to think through your potential housing crisis in your area? Your sound.
We can mute it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. This is something that I looked at while campaigning for office. I know one of the grievances many folks had in our community was affordable housing, as far as rental rates and new home prices, right? So in our city, our median household income is about 51,000, right? In the county, it's about 76,000 a year, median household income. But yet still, when you're looking at the inventory that's available, average home prices are about 350,000, 400,000, right? Before I was elected, we had some affordable housing that was primarily inhabited by immigrant families that have been offered options for relocation because the council passed, for development of a development complex of townhomes that are going to be priced at up to 700,000, per unit. And we continue to see more developers having a desire to establish homes and apartments in the city of Lawrenceville. Now, to Ms. Sales, the one thing that I started promoting and discussing with our council is that I don't want to see any other developers coming to Lawrenceville, coming to the city council for us to to pass anything where there isn't about 10 to 15% to income eligible families, right? Because what we see more developments coming, and there just was not a focus on how can we implement a plan for affordable housing within these structures, within these new developments that's coming forward. Now, we do have a Lawrenceville Housing Authority that's a totally separate entity from the city of Lawrenceville. Now, they do work on affordable housing projects. They just got an ordinance passed from the county to build 2 new affordable housing projects in the county. So that's great. In Lawrenceville, in the city of Lawrenceville itself, I'm speaking with the director of the Lawrenceville Housing Authority to see if we can work on allocating about 10 to 15% of those, any new developments that's coming forward for income eligible families. The housing authority said that they could purchase that part and they can provide the affordability that's needed. Now, the thing is, we had to educate folks that affordable housing is not low income housing. And I think that's the language, and the whole concept got lost because residents are feeling like, well, I don't want any Section 8 family living next to me and so on and so forth. And that was not the case. So we had to educate folks and on differentiating between low income housing and affordable housing, right? Now, I spoke to the median household income. We have many bars and restaurants here in the city, right? Many of these people who are working at these businesses really don't earn a livable wage in order to afford to live in the city. Right. When you have apartments that are 1 bedrooms that are starting at $1,500 a month and going anywhere to about from $1,500 to $2,200, depending upon the bedrooms, the number of bedrooms, and so on and so forth, that is not affordability for those individuals working in those businesses. We have 2 colleges in the area, Georgia Gwinnett College and Gwinnett Technical College. New grads are unable to live in the city unless they're roommates. There's a roommate situation, so on and so forth. I've had seniors approach me and said they would love to live within the city, but as individuals who are living on a fixed income, it's hard for them to consider Lawrenceville as a place to live because of the unaffordability of living in the city. So we see those challenges, and as a council member, I'm bringing these discussions to the table to make sure that we can at least speak to these developers and say, okay, fine, I understand you have a 300 home development that you want to construct in Lawrenceville. How much of that have you considered to be income eligible? We want to have those discussions going forward. And that was a discussion that I implemented a few months ago when I finally sat on a city council that actually welcomed a developer to look at plans for developing in the city. And these are discussions that I'm having going forward. Now, when we look at, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of small business support, we do have resources within the city. We have a Gwinnett Entrepreneur Center that serves as an accelerator for upstarts, young businesses that are in need of resources. I had the opportunity to do a business plan presentation at one of their sessions for National Small Business Week. And, realizing that there is a larger number of, so-called Black and brown minorities who are, entrepreneurs going through these programs, and knowing that we do have this resource available to them. Not too long ago, about a year and a half ago, I worked with the team of Representative Carolyn Bordeaux to identify minority businesses that are in need of resources like how to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan through the SBA. So looking at those programs and or programs like what the SBA produces to make sure that our Black and brown businesses are being a part of those opportunities and those options, making sure that there's equity and inclusion when it comes to small businesses, just like looking at housing developments, looking at these new developments that are coming into Lawrenceville. So I have not approached any of the HBCUs. That's a great idea. And I think I'll look further into that. I know I met with the president of Morris Brown about a year and a half ago, and I just heard that they got their full accreditation back. So I definitely would love to revisit him and look at how we can build a partnership for our young entrepreneurs and small business owners here in the city. But, we are working on several other programs that even what I have introduced to the city council, transportation, like throughout the city of Lawrenceville, to increase the accessibility to businesses so that small businesses in the city can see greater access from consumers, from residents in the city. We have further discussion on that because we just can't seem to pass this transportation expansion in Gwinnett. That continues to be a challenge for us. But I still want to be able to have access to our local small businesses and access from our consumers to shop as they live here in the city. So we're continuing I'm 6 months in. I have some other things that I definitely want to have a discussion with on the city council, but definitely looking at how we can provide more inclusion and equity to our Black and brown residents in the city.
I have a question, and before I go to 2 questions in the chat,
Yeah.
and this issue about waiting for developers to come. I mean, okay, we know a financial system of credit unions and banks, for example. And I was wondering, this is an aside, but it's relevant. So I was complaining the other day that, okay, they want to, cancel all student debt. But I'm just saying, but somebody's still going to pay. It's not really canceled. It's kind of, the money's moved around. And I'm saying, well, why can't we come up with something new that kind of writes off some of the debt based on what they have already done? I definitely think the debt is ridiculous. And in the future going forward, don't just say we're going to have free education because who's going to pay? But can we not have a different education style? So for example, if there are state colleges or community colleges in the state and the student wants to go to school for free, then they could do some volunteer work in the state that basically is like you're working, but it's paying for your schooling. So it's a one hand wash the other, as opposed to this freeness mentality, which creates a different mindset. I think it's very dangerous to have that. Or you could call it something sexy and modern, I don't know, some new pioneers or something, but some way of having the students who don't want to borrow money to go to school, to be able to go to school, but actually working in some jobs which are not necessarily full-time job, but some job that they do that is useful for the good of the community, because we're saying educating them at no cost or very low cost is for our good as a whole. But they must be giving back something now, not after they finish school and then they go and work for private sector. And then if we're lucky, they write a check. So there's that. Then there's the issue about the housing developers. I mean, how much work I know there's some NGOs that have tried over the years to create housing solutions. They tend to be largely white-run organizations. But is there something we can learn from some of these organizations that we can make available to our Black communities, the Black churches, etc., that we cannot just wait for developers who may just give us 15%, but actually create a new model of development that says, I can do good by doing well. And rather than saying, I'm going to go into business, work with the people who that would say, I don't need to make, 300% profit. I can do well with 100,000. But those kind of people get a short, nobody takes them seriously. They consider it crazy. It's like they get a mark against them. So how are we, if we're going to be conscientious about creating change, are we ready to even change the way we look at people who have these quote unquote crazy ideas? Mr. Gardner, I see your hand up.
Yes, and I will say that the means and the access is already there, especially when you talk about churches and specifically them having an ability to provide affordable housing in their communities. And I'll give you a prime example. So if a church forms what was considered a nonprofit arm, and some of you guys know this, there are two designations. One is a CHODO through HUD, being designated through HUD. And the other one, oh my God, forgive me, it's close to CHODO, but now it escapes me. Community Development, I think it's a CDC, Community Housing Development Corporation. Those entities, I literally had a church, and this was even before I got to the city of Griffin as Development Services Director, a local church, small church, probably no more than 100, 120 people in this church, owned land adjacent to them and built through that designation an apartment complex that was geared specifically to residents in the community, and had land that they were turning into single family residential units. And this was in competition against a lot of the landlords in the city who were also part of the power structure in that city, local council members, that eventually ran that pastor out of town and curtailed the growth in that area. But those are access points for those type of entities, for churches, to get involved in being even bigger in the community than they typically are. And that's been one of my criticisms of some of these churches, is because they don't take advantage of this to be that catalyst in the community of providing low-income housing opportunities, whether it's rental or owner ownership, to not only their patrons, but also to the community that surround them. They take the money and they spend it elsewhere, and I get it. On the issue of the city's HBCUs, and Mr. Thompson, I'm gonna send you. I'm sending you this information, but we work with an entity. It originally started through EPA and a gentleman called Mike Burns, where he linked us to the HBCUs in the Metro Atlanta area. And we had students that came in and did works in two realms, either as a group, and then on our IT department, we would partner with Georgia State and with Morehouse and those other schools, and they would come and bring students that would work a group on projects within our IT department. But we also brought them on through the internship program to get those practical work experience. And we've continued working in that realm to the point where those guys did a cybersecurity protocol that's almost now the prima for small cities in Georgia. Started out in the city of East Point, where I was recently. And I know he's no longer with EPA, but he's actually, which is crazy, they allow him to take the program and go private. So he's actually doing that, and he's connecting local governments with local universities. And recently, he was down in the Bahamas working with the University of the Bahamas on a similar program. So, I mean, he's not adverse to staying in the United States whatsoever. I mean, he's linking these local colleges, especially HBC, but he's also working with the majority white universities. But how do you partner with communities around you to provide services that enhance not only the community in which they're in, but also the kids by giving them those opportunities to pad their resumes with experience? So cool gentlemen to get involved with.
Okay.
You know, that question actually came up. Dr. Jacinta Higgs had two questions. She had a question about what resources are present in the USA that might be shared with or allocated to Caribbean islands during a parallel COVID crisis and struggle, and what are some of the best practices and successful responses that may be employed in Caribbean countries that still struggle post-Hurricane Dorian in the case of the Bahamas and during COVID? These are two questions which may be actually outside the purview of this session, but will be in our disaster resilience session on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. We're covering disaster resilience, and definitely we want to answer that those two questions there. That's why we're having it. We know USAID had a partnership on disaster resilience, but the diaspora was not engaged, and we're quite upset about that. So to come back to this side of the world and how we live, we talk a lot about housing, but I would like to end on a more personal note in terms of job creation and small business starts. Lorian Sales had said that this corridor has a lot of biotech companies, but I'm wondering how many of the companies in biotech and in the healthcare sector in Gaithersburg are run by people of African descent. What are there any ways in which city councils can work with state houses to sort of compel, apprenticeships or something that might give those people who are interested an opportunity to get a toe in the door? Because sometimes, there are people who may be interested, but just don't have a way to start. They don't have the background, but they have the passion. They think they could do something, but they didn't study it in school. They don't want to re-educate themselves or retread themselves, but there's no pathway. And we know we're moving towards an era of micro-credentialing and no more big formal degrees. So instead of providing economic opportunity, we have jobs on the one hand, we don't have people, so we're importing H2 visas from India and Bangladesh and wherever to bring them here, but the people here don't have the jobs, even if they're interested, the skills. How might we really take this opportunity of not everybody's online and everybody is gone, education is gone online, to really think through some new programs we might attempt to start in order to get our people retrained for the jobs that do exist?
So, we both talked when we first met about our SMART agendas. And I know you noticed my SMART agenda about strengthening our commitment to 21st century education from cradle to career and beyond, making a living in our county more affordable, advancing local food production in our agricultural reserve, and recovering from the pandemic in an equitable way for all of our residents, and then tackling climate change through multimodal transportation solutions. So I wanted to go back a bit to the question about the housing affordability, because you mentioned some really important programs, the CDBG funding, the Commercial Development Block Grant, the HOME program. There's another, the SHOP program. None of these things can happen without public-private partnerships or at the mercy of developers. And so that's how affordable housing is going to get built. And the way we do affordable housing in Montgomery County ensures that it's not concentrated affordable housing. So we're not concentrating poverty, and we're not concentrating years of disinvestment in certain communities. And so when we're thinking about building in the communities and we're thinking about how to engage our businesses, it has to be thinking about 15-minute communities, mixed use developments, and that comes through zoning changes. We want to ensure that density is priority. We want to ensure that we are building communities in safe spaces so we are not encountering any environmental injustices where we're building affordable communities near incinerators or in neighborhoods that are not healthy for the residents. And so in thinking about how can we prepare the workforce today for the future economy tomorrow, we spend half of our budget in the county. Our county oversees our school system. We have a $6.5 billion budget. And because of our agreements between the state, we ensure that we fund our schools at a maintenance of effort level per pupil funding. So about half of our budget from our public schools K through 12 to our community college, we spend about $3.5 billion on our school system. And so out of that funding, we have 2 schools that are dedicated to career and technology education, because I believe not all of our students are college bound. And even if they are, we should still provide opportunities for them to graduate college and career ready. And so when I mentioned that we're the biotech corridor, it should be the biopharmaceutical, because we're lacking in tech innovation. We don't have a lot of tech investments. And if we're looking at the amount of money procurement spends on technology, it's not going to Black businesses. It's mostly going to the Asian and Indian businesses. And so how are we preparing our workforce? How are we working with those businesses to make sure that we have programs like Girls Who Code, and working with, the Amazons and all of those big tech companies, Google, to ensure that our kids have access to those programs. Most of the programming that's available for students to get acclimated to a career in technology, you can access those programs online. You can get certifications for free. Students are accessing coding, programming right online through year-long certification programs. And so we're going to have to focus on building better partnerships, not just with our development community, our nonprofits who can provide housing, and our big businesses, tech businesses, who are actually providing incentives for students to pursue careers in technology education. And I'm a big proponent of, where you invest your money is where you value your community, where your values are. And so if we're really trying to create a strong economy for our diverse community, how are we investing those dollars to ensure that the students who leave our public schools can matriculate through the system, find a good paying job, and afford to move here when they're done? And whether it's a way that they can repay some of the money back through maintaining a job for a few years, similar to what the military does, we should be able to create those programs, especially now that we have technology to support, the long distance learning and engagement of students in those programs. And so we've been able to find billions of dollars to send overseas to, fight wars. So the money is there if they need to cancel student loan debt. People are up in arms and concerned about, the cancellation of student loan debt. And that's actually going to reinfuse money into the economy. People are strapped and thinking about, are we going to pay our mortgage? Are we going to pay to care for our families' healthcare costs and all these competing costs? People can't even get home loans because they are in debt from student loans. And so this is a crippling, financial barrier for people to really increase their wealth. And when we're looking at the Black community and how much we're making on the dollar as individuals in comparison to our white counterparts, when we're looking at how much Black women make in relation to Black men, we are already at a disadvantage. And if we don't work on leveling the playing field through a robust package of programs, we're going to find ourselves right here years from now. And so now is the time to really recirculate how we invest in the community, how we create jobs in the community, how we prepare the future workforce, and how we influence zoning laws to ensure that we're building affordable communities for all incomes. We have to make sure that there are incomes, housing for incomes at all levels of our community.
Well, I do think that, this issue of affordable housing is really, as you say, maybe central to where we go. And it's so much a part of the American dream. And we did talk about what's the future of American dream. Everybody wants to own a home. The 80s was the beginning of the grand homes and the Mac mansions. And then we had the housing crisis because everybody realized they couldn't afford Mac mansion, and now we're moving to the tiny home phase. And some people wonder, how could you live in such a small space? But when you look at it on the website, tiny homes. Then you have the 3D printed homes phase that we're going through. And my current, and we're probably going to get your help on this, Lorian Sales, or maybe Frederick or somebody. I've been reaching out to every single 3D printed home person I've seen online and saying, hey, we want to test your 3D printed home. I'm working in a historical Black college and university. I want you to put one on our land. So far, nobody has paid me no mind, but hopefully one day somebody will give me a 3D printed house I can put on either Morgan State campus or some campus that I'm attached to, Coppin State. I really want to put it on Morgan State. They have enough land and do some tests on it to make sure, it can, the engineering school can do some tests on it. And also to see if it's something that really will be good for affordable housing. That's really why I want to do it. They say it's good for affordable housing, but until I touch, smell, feel, live in one for a year, have our engineers look at it, and we feel confident that it has the creature comforts then, even though it's small, creature comforts that we want and quality, then I'm not going to be a 3D printed house advocate, because I'm always worried about tornadoes and see how many houses get destroyed in America because they're not built in any steel or blocks, so they get torn up. So even that, I think, if you know that your city is in a block, in an area where tornadoes hit, shouldn't you change the building code to say, hey, it might cost a little bit more, but make it smaller, huh? Let's make it smaller, but make it stay. So we don't have to deal with the insurance, that you won't lose your home, but your insurance doesn't cover the rebuilding costs, because insurance is another, problem area where we all have insurance, but when the crisis hits, we have a problem. And that happens here. We've seen more climate weather-related events. And so there's a lot of education that needs to be done. So one last question for you to end up with, this last question. How do you see then your role as a teacher? And I just came into my mind that perhaps the one thing that you can give that maybe other people aren't giving, because people are too busy just running around trying to be important. But just like how the judges this morning talked about educating people, really, how can we move the cities in which, and the city councils in which you have power and influence, to a more educational stance of participatory democracy framework? I mean, there is software. Hawaii has a green growth agenda that have a lot of public dashboards and public participation. Here in Montgomery County, we have all these county commissions. I'm not sure. I mean, it's good that they're doing all this ethnic stuff, but I think it was so nice if we had, some dead dashboards around housing, dashboards around climate issues, and then our commissions are educated to think about not just about their interest, the Caribbean, we have to have a festival. I mean, that's everybody like a festival, like a thing, but something that knits us together in a sustainable vision of the future, so that America's sustainable development goals, which they do have them, I think, but nobody talks about them. There's this move towards a sustainable cities movement. As you know, Denver will be hosting the global American Cities Sustainability Summit next year in Denver somewhere. So small cities in which you are engaged could be part of this movement towards this culture of well-being. Wales, the whole country of Wales, has a well-being commission. You're both in Georgia. Could this be something that you join forces in Georgia and say, hey, we're in two cities, we have enough officials in Georgia now, where we can create a well-being commission to look at a new metric for what does a good life look like? Does it have to be a 3,000 square foot home? No. It may be a 1,000 square foot home or 1,500 square foot home, but it's clean, it's in a nice place, they have amenities in the long run, because you don't need to have your own court or your own pool necessarily using one day a week or one day a month. So how can you kind of even move beyond what you're doing right now to bring this new thinking, looking at what's ahead and the challenges ahead for housing and climate and jobs and retraining and interest rate? How can you use your influence to move these ideas forward where you have influence?
I think one thing we all have in common, Dr. Nelson, is we all have access to strategic plans. In the strategic plans, that's exactly what they are. They're a very comprehensive visionary document that tells the community how we're going to build, plan, prepare, and actually tackle the future based on projections. And the Office of Legislative Oversight in our county has lots of different data points. A few years ago, the county declared racism as a public health issue. And so we have the Thrive visionary document. It's our master plan, which will guide the next 30 years. We haven't updated it for 30 years, but it's been delayed for a year now because of the lack of outreach and engagement with diverse communities. And so now they're in the midst of providing a racial equity lens to all of the visionary recommendations that they've created to address housing affordability, housing density, to create 15-minute communities, to prioritize transit-oriented development, to ensure that we're also meeting climate action plan goals. And so it has to be integrated fully into how we fund our budget and how we plan our community. And that's what this document does. And I'm sure, my colleagues in Georgia have a similar document that explains what the vision, whether it's a 10-year, 20, 30-year vision of the plan for the community will be. And I encourage anyone who lives in a county, a state, municipality, it's a required document. You can see where the master plans are going. You could see where the new housing developments are going. You can see where the new biotech, the new science city is going. And this is what we have to do as citizens. We have to be more proactive with the public information that's available to every single one of us. We cannot sit on the sidelines and wait for us to be spoon-fed information. We have to be proactively looking for the information that is going to help us make those connections of how we're going to really be investors in our future.
Actually, I like what you said, and that takes us to exactly where we need to be. We've come to the end of this session, and we're going to go straight into the closing session on civic engagement. And so it's perfect what you said, because what popped into my head when you said we have to be active, proactive, I thought, well, those documents are well and fine, but they're in fine print. Who the hell can read them? And I'm wondering to myself, well, maybe here's an opportunity for, NGOs or organizations to be funded to turn those documents into spoon-fed documents, because the average person does need to be spoon-fed. It does need to be a grade 9 version of a document with nice pictures that people can, and be made into movies, etc., which I love to do. Right? So I mean, I certainly will be coming to you once you win, and saying, hey, let's talk about the sustainable future. And I'm really happy to have met Austin. I know Austin from before. I'm really happy to have met Frederick Gardner, a Bahamian, finally. And we know you're all here, but we're also hidden, who is an elected official. And really happy that Mayor Vincent was kind enough to do a duty. And I really want to bring her up because, first of all, she responded. Then she said no, but she didn't just say no. She actually said, but I have somebody for you. And that for me is servant leadership. So I'm going to big her up, Mayor Sandra Vincent of Georgia, who could not be here, but she sent Frederick Gardner, who's not even in her city. She just knows him and says, hey, he'd be somebody who I think you'd love to get to know. And he last minute, and he showed up today. So I'm really grateful. I think we're all grateful. This is the beginning of a process. We've come to the end of the day when it comes to elected officials, but I want to say that one of the things we want to do at ICS is have a de facto elected official advisory board kind of thing. We know there's no such thing as a Caribbean American elected officials or organization. We don't really think there needs to be one either because of the optics of that, quite frankly. We're very concerned about how it would look if all of a sudden, you form this group, why would you need to form it really? There's so few of you. I don't see the point in it. And then it could be used against you in an election campaign. So I think what we're thinking of is that ICS itself should just have, a list of all elected officials that want to be involved in this kind of a conversation, this dialogue process, this education process with the Caribbean American citizenry, and have it just be this advisory group that we can call in and say, hey, we need your help in thinking through this, or hey, we have some ideas we want to run by you to see if that would be helpful for you. And I do hope that as we begin to build out this space, looking at sustainability, looking at learning from you, because some of the things that you do here will be very useful to educating local elected officials back home. And so that's kind of where we also want to take this. We are very concerned about issues of transparency and corruption. And as you all know, nobody in the Caribbean has ever gone to jail who's ever been elected. Not so in America. You do the wrong thing, they will find you. Somehow the tax guy finds you, right? Because one thing America knows is their taxes. How you living so big and you're not paying taxes? They start watching you, right? So my point is, we are going to need help. Civil society in the Caribbean is going to need help. And so we believe by forming this advisory committee council, we'll be able to tap into the expertise you bring and to help prepare, thank you, to help prepare our electorate in the Caribbean region, electorate here to be more educated, first of all, for the participatory democracy, which has to emerge if we are to have communities of well-being in the future. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again for having us.
Virtual round of applause to everybody. And I guess I should come down from my perch. I should come down from my perch.
Oh, there you go.
Everybody can see me. I was perched up on top. That was like a disembodied voice, right? I was perched up on top. Thank you again, guys, for coming. And Jacinta Higgs says, great session. So I release you to go back to your family for the rest of your holiday. And I would say a blessed Juneteenth day to you all.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna go straight to our next session. We're gonna wrap it up. We're gonna ask Amala Luncheon to come in and take over from me. Amala will be moderating this session. And we're gonna ask Ray also to join us. We're gonna be talking about, what we're talking about?
Civic
Ray,
engagement.
turn on camera. Citizen engagement.
Civic engagement, yes.
Civic engagement, which is a very critical thing. Andrea, very engaged. Everybody on the call that wants to be on the say something, please. It's really an open format.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because we keep talking about civic engagement, and we say that almost in every session. Every time we have people from different groups, we talk about civic engagement because people often ask us, and I'm happy that Dr. Higgs asked that question, is there anything that people can do? Is there any help available, And sometimes the help is right in your backyard and you don't know it, because we often look for help in the form of handouts. But there are things that we can do by ourselves, and we talk about civic engagement every time. I've listened from 9 o'clock this morning, so just like Dr. Nelson, I've had a very long day. It was very interesting, and funny enough, it went by quickly, and I feel like I'm back in 2021 because we did this last year where we had these marathon sessions, But at the end of the day, it's quite engaging. And just to recap some of the things, and as people were talking, I was making notes because I realized that it really fed into wrapping up with civic engagement. So civic engagement really is how the general public could get involved in what the government is doing. And I remember, I know for sure that in the Caribbean, we don't teach civics in school anymore. I know that for sure. So we keep asking our Caribbean brothers and sisters to advocate for themselves, because we say to them, and these are the exact words that we have used, well, the same way that we actually talk to our elected officials, you can do that. And they're like, huh? Because it's a completely foreign idea. They talk by calling these talk shows, and it's not an engaged sort of conversation is, well, this is what you guys are doing wrong, and this is why we're going to vote for the red party as opposed to the yellow party, because everything is divided along color lines in the region. So what we need to do is start with political involvement. I remember last year, one of the Ignite, one of the people who was who had won an award under the 30 under 30, he said to us, he works on Capitol Hill, and he had said to us, the first thing you need to do is vote. As simple as it seems, because if you vote, you have a voice. You feel like I have put you in this position, and now I can ask you to be accountable because I have given you my vote. You now work for me. We are not at that place with our engagement. So with political involvement, you can vote, you can campaign, and you can write letters to your representatives. That's one of the things he said. Write letters, because he said every time you write a letter, it has to be cataloged. It doesn't just go into this nothingness. But if only one person wrote about it, let's say you wrote about a pothole on the street, because now I'm going Caribbean with it. Let's say you wrote about a pothole and only one person is affected by this pothole. But we have 10 letters for a lamppost that needs to be put at a dangerous intersection. Then obviously the attention is going to be put on the lamppost. However, if you get another 5 people writing about a pothole, then it's like, hey guys, it's not just a lone voice. So that writing, he helped us to understand that when letters get to elected officials, they are cataloged and responses are sent. So it's incredibly important. So the first way that you can get involved is really through political involvement. Then you have a social responsibility. So you need to consider the welfare of others in the environment. So I live in this community. Okay, well, I want my community to stay the way that it is, one, or to be improved, secondly. So what are the things that I can do? I have this social responsibility. So now I get involved with whatever. You can do community research. So you want to know, how is my community being affected by these current social problems, whatever the social problems are, and they're going to differ from state to state, from town to town, from city to city, and further from country to country. So what is it that needs to be done? How are these problems affecting us? You can get involved with associations, and several of the attorneys this morning, well, judges and justices, spoke about getting involved with organizations, specifically getting involved with organizations, because that is going to help with your community development. You can also get involved in civic engagement by direct service. Give your time, give of your time and energy to address the needs in your community. And that's how most of the elected officials started. And I want to say Justice McShann said that this morning. He started as a volunteer before he got into elective office. Same thing with Councilman Thompson. He used to volunteer a lot. Then philanthropic giving. You give to items that you don't need anymore, give them away for people who are doing fundraising and that kind of thing. So that good comes from the things that no longer serve you. So give away, like it's seasonally. Women always, we move with styles. So if something was last season or whatever, we'd be tempted to move on to the new thing. You could give it away because you're probably not going to revisit it. My rule is if I haven't worn it in 6 months, I can donate it. So maybe that's something that we can look at. And then advocacy and education. What we do here at ICS is advocacy. We talk and talk and talk and talk. We help you to understand by repeating it. And we have no issues with repeating it, but we advocate for people to be able to do all the things I just said. Get involved, talk to your congressperson, know who your congressperson is. At the very least, know who the person is. So once you understand those steps, then we're able to move forward from there, understanding that there's a plan to get involved in being, part of this representation, because you don't want people to just make decisions for you if you have an opportunity to be there and have your own voice be heard. Some of the things I wrote this morning that I thought were actually quite interesting. So I started with Dr. Pope, who spoke about dismantling structures that don't see our humanity. That's a powerful, powerful statement. And you may want to know, well, how are we going to dismantle this structure? By doing the same things we just spoke about. So getting engaged. He also said, use Juneteenth as a portal to engage in deep study. Fantastic idea. And we've come up through the rest of the day planting ideas about how we use Juneteenth specifically to make sure that it is commemorative and not celebratory. So that's one of the things, and Dr. Nelson already said, we're going to write to Congress people, again, using one of the tools. So we're going to write to Congress people to ensure that it doesn't become a major sale. That, I think, is fantastic. Then Geoffrey Phillip, I really like Geoffrey Phillip with a lot of the things he said, because the peace and love message with Rastafari. So you could be, not all engagement or not all rebellion has to be in the form of a war. And if we know anything about Rasta, we know that the main thing they talk about is peace and love. And so we know resistance does not have to be violent. And at one point, Dr. Nelson, that R in SMART, we were considering making it for resistance, because we had, what do you have for resilience?
It also means reciprocity, because on the values level, they mean something else. It means solidarity, mutuality, altruism, reciprocity, and trust.
Okay, but I remember last year when Blacker told us, no, we don't need to be resilient. We have to be resistant. You know, and that gave us the sort of edge that we needed to move forward. So, you know, I was happy this morning when I heard Geoffrey Phillip with resistance. I'm like, yes, that is what it is. That's what it needs to be, you know. And then State Attorney Aisha Braveboy, she spoke about role models, having role models. I mean, we really cannot stress that enough. If we are able to see people who look like us, and then I know Dr. Boyce Davis was not having the Meghan Markle thing, you know, but, you know, because yes, you want to resist it, but there are elements of good that can come from that, because we can decide what we take from it. She's already up on a pedestal. We can decide how much of it we absorb, you know, so it could be okay. And State Attorney also spoke about, she did say, one of the things that was interesting to me is that 1/3 of the incarcerated population have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. That's a staggering statistic. 1/3. That's a really high number. But a lot of it too comes from we have issues with how we address mental wellness, you know. And someone this morning also said that everybody needs, that might have been Judge Taylor, who said everybody needs a therapist. So the doctor needs a therapist, the judge needs a therapist. Everybody needs to talk to somebody, because we all need, the same way you're on a diet and you exercise, you do half an hour a day, you drink your water, whatever. How are you exercising your mind? Who are you talking to about the voices in your head? But we have so much stigma attached to mental health that, you know, because in the Caribbean, no, this person is mad. And we stop right there. But somebody could be on the road to mental wellness, and is the approach. We need to have a different approach to it. Judge Taylor also spoke about the fact that jury duty is a part of your civic duty. So a lot of people try to get out. It's bigger to get out of jury duty than to actually go when they call you. You know, I feel like if I get called, I want to go, because I want to be a part. I want to feel like I'm a part of something, you know, and I feel like, but you know, again, with how we've been indoctrinated in society, we start to think of places where jurors have to be put into protective custody because, you know, people feel like you're snitching and you're one of the people that sent my homeboy to jail. And come on, we need to get past that sort of thinking. So if you're called to be on a jury, then do it if you can. Justice McShann spoke about volunteering if you want to affect your community. Prison reform was interesting, very interesting, because we need to talk about it. Prison reform and sentencing reform. Van Jones, I know, is doing a lot of work on prison reform, and it may or may not be jaded, but if people are talking about it, let's talk about it, because that's what's
I just
going to
want to
help.
say something. I just did some research recently, and Norway is supposedly the best country for recidivism in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Norway has totally revamped its prison system. They have some of their better prisons, out of all of them. They don't have bars on doors. They're like apartment complexes.
Okay.
So they don't have bars, which
so you basically know why you're there, and you're going to be
yes.
helped to be
right.
put
So
back into society. So the approach is different.
They focus a lot on recidivism. I also was doing some reading about the Singapore prison system, and I didn't see much about what the condition of the cells were, but they have a very robust, let's say, branding strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the wardens are called captains of lives, and they are taught to see themselves as helping, and they always put this in a sentence, those persons who want to be rehabilitated.
Mm-hmm.
That is their function, to be the captain of lives, to support who want to be rehabilitated.
Mm-hmm.
But they have also a very robust e-prison system to support and reduce. But then I said to myself, this may not work in the Caribbean, because their murder rate in both of those countries is like 2 per 100,000. We're up to 40 something per 100,000.
Yes.
In small islands. But I'm just saying that it's something we need to think about as we begin to think about here in America, where the most people in the world are incarcerated are here in America,
Mm-hmm.
And of course, here in the Americas is
Mm-hmm.
where the most people in the world are incarcerated. And I find it interesting because we both have the common history of slavery.
But and again, a lot of things are couched in language, because as you were saying, the captains of rehabilitation, I'm thinking of places where there are where you have the opportunity to be organ donors. And there's a low uptick when people have to, when you go to fill out your license and you have to tick here if you, or check this box if you want to donate your organs. And it's not a very high number. However, the country, and it may be Sweden, that has the highest, where I think they have a 96% subscription rate. It says, check this box if you don't wish to be an organ donor. So it's couched differently. People don't like to be told what to do. Tick here for this and tick. No, I'm not ticking any box. That's the attitude. So if you put it a little different, so now you find, okay, well, we don't want to opt out, so we just leave it alone. So the approach makes all the difference in the world. It makes it, because again, it's the science of the mind. So if you're able to get people around to your thinking without having to beat them over the head with a big stick, then that kind of works. But I thought we had a very fantastic session and points where people can understand how people got to where they are. What are the things we can do to make sure that we can get further engaged? And then there's so many opportunities, even with ICS and with platforms like this, to be able to make a contribution, have your voice heard, then go back to your own community and say, hey guys, this is what we're doing and this is where I need your help, because we need numbers, because for most things, we need numbers. So we have to be able to create that groundswell within our own churches, within our own small women's groups, wherever we are on campuses. And then we can filter out into the larger society and be able to be impactful. But it's not a daunting mission. I mean, I am not put off by it, but I've been known to like hard work. So,
well, certainly if we're going to take the civic engagement thing to its full conclusion, and it's so much tied into this issue of corruption and transparency, which we have more or less decided to pledge to fight in the region. I'm not sure if you said that you had 2 St. Lucian politicians in jail, or
yes.
2 in jail because of corruption, or in jail because they were pissing off the other party. And that's
one person who's a very well-respected attorney, and I was quite surprised. I think at one point he was deputy prime minister. He fired a gun in an open space. He carried a firearm, and he's a little bit of a hothead. So he's been in jail for a while now. And then the second person, for his own will be corruption, because he was collecting funds under some false pretext or whatever. Yes. So
well, maybe more of us need to in the Caribbean need to know about that, because maybe if we start to have them as poster boys
precisely,
for the
because
system, more Caribbean patriots might realize, oh, it's not impossible for them to go to jail.
Right.
I
And this first one,
here
the first one is
board.
A fantastic constitutional lawyer, very bright, incredibly bright, incredibly too bright for his own good. But, you know, a little bit of a temper and, you know, fast driver and flashy and, you know, that kind of thing. So I was floored when I heard he went to jail. I'm like, wow, I thought he was untouchable. But I think it sends a good message.
Well, maybe we need to have the group that worked on that speak on Friday to show how were they able to get that to be secured. Caleb Aruska has a question. It's in the chat. Amala, you want to take that question?
Caribbean citizens do not live single issues or single identity lives. It claims the desire of leaving no one behind, but ignores systemic exclusion and structural violence that alienate sex workers, persons with disabilities, LGBT livelihoods. How has the diaspora engaged on ensuring key and vulnerable populations are not left behind? Well, in general, what I think we have here is inclusivity. So in the Caribbean, we still have, and Dr. Nelson alluded to it earlier, where we talk about not being able to do things to people because they're in a, or not wanting to associate with people because they find themselves in a certain demographic or whatever. Here we work the opposite way. We work to ensure, at least publicly, that everyone is included. We work on inclusion. But if we're being honest, I want to say that the Caribbean has improved considerably, because now in Pride Month, there are people marching in the streets that didn't happen before. 10 years ago, that was not happening. So we've got to a place now where our tolerance level has increased, and increased more so that we're encouraging people to talk on platforms and that kind of. So we've come a long way. We've come a long way. Even Jamaica, that had been like the most strict about that in their civil society. Jamaica is very intolerant of LGBTQIA plus people, but now, you know, it's certainly not as bad. Several other islands, they have pride rallies, and it's huge in Guyana. They celebrate pride and so on. So we've come a long way from the first days when, you know, all bad things were attached to homosexuality, and homosexuals that caused AIDS and all of that. We're long past those days, thank goodness. So I feel like we are not still on the single issue thing. I think the one single issue that we continue to talk about is probably crime. But crime now has several tenets, because we talk about domestic violence, we talk about gun violence, we talk about human trafficking and stuff like that. And that, I think, is a single issue that needs its own platform. And we ought to be holding our politicians' feet to the fire with stuff like that, because I'm not seeing as much movement as we should be seeing. And I want to say that the help is there especially for crime and security issues. And I'm saying that because I know that we have worked on the white paper that informs how the US, the State Department, deals with the region. ICS has done that. So I know that there's talk about it. But the region, on the other hand, because we understand that there are people who profit from crime, it is not moving as fast as it should.
Let me also say something on that. The diaspora in general, that is organized. So let's talk about the organized diaspora. The countries that have the most strong organized diaspora are Jamaica, Haiti, and Guyana. The other diaspora groups come and go depending on their mode. They pop up here and there: St. Lucia Nationals, Antigua Nationals, St. Vincent Nationals, Trinidad and Tobago. They mostly do steel pan and stuff like that on Carnival. There's hardly many Trinidadian associations. There are a couple of alumni associations. Across the region, high school alumni associations tend to be pretty strong.
Yes.
And so they are not going to take on issues like sex workers, persons with disabilities, and LGBT livelihoods. We have a few very nascent women's organizations, and they are beginning to take on more like domestic violence. Gender-based violence is kind of what they're focusing a lot on trafficking these days. They don't take on too much of anything else because, one, most of the Caribbean diaspora that are in organizations, they do it as a hobby. They're not paid. Most of us are volunteer organizations.
Yes.
So there's nobody being paid to do it the way. And so we're basically operating on what we have passion to do. On the subject matter of health, a lot of organizations are involved in healthcare. The doctors and nurses have healthcare missions. And I've not heard about many, let's say, medical missions that focus specifically on sex workers, persons with disability, or LGBT persons, and the systemic exclusion and structural violence. Because the few bar associations that we have here, Caribbean bar associations, are not that active, if you ask me. And when they are active, they focus on getting out the vote things and registering and helping Caribbean immigrants to become legal. And they also do a lot of work around becoming citizens as well. So in terms of answering the second part of your question, they're not really engaged in ensuring key and vulnerable populations other than children, people who are sick, as in where they come from, and they do health missions. And to a lesser extent, I know that Andrew for sure is working on education, persons with disability, but I don't know of any diaspora organizations that do work with either sex workers or LGBT issues. No, I know there was a group out of New York, but I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. Because they were kind of very noisy around the time that Portia Simpson was still in power, but I haven't heard anything from them. So I feel as if to say that that question is maybe not the answer you'd like to hear, but that's what is happening in that for the organized diaspora. Doesn't mean that individuals aren't doing anything, but the organized public diaspora. I don't know, like in DC where we are, there's not a Caribbean Pride organization. The people who would identify as LGBTQ in the Caribbean community do not see themselves as activists or advocates, and they don't operate in that space.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? Okay. So thank you so much. Okay. The deficiency in institutional structure is very helpful. Yes, I mean, unfortunately, all of us are volunteers. And, I would say something on that because 2 years ago, I got very upset because I wanted to work with Indigenous peoples from 2019. I don't know what had happened, but I thought, oh my God, we're not here. I think it was an event at OAS, and the Spanish-speaking people from Indigenous groups were here, but I didn't see anybody from like Guyana, Suriname, Dominica, and Trinidad also has a body, right? I didn't see any Garifunas there either. So I'm like, wait a minute, what happened to the Indigenous people on our side of the world? So I decided I'm going to go on a campaign to find them. Well, I was able to get one call in with the Dominican Kalinaga chief or council member or whatever. And we had one conversation, but it was a very challenging situation where they don't have access to the internet. They have to come into town. It was just so much that made it challenging for them to even maintain a relationship. And so I have told some people, listen, I know you guys have your own issues. I found out that they're trying to pull off a land event. And so because ICS does have a small office in the OAS building, we have said, okay, we can support you if you come to Washington and you need a place to meet or whatever, we can certainly support that. But, again, that is a group which certainly ICS has been paying attention to and trying to figure out how we can help, because we're very concerned about the land grab in particular. We're very concerned about the land grab in particular that I see governments in the region doing for Indigenous people's land, in some cases, like the ones in Jamaica. So Yes, on the 14 islands of Caribbean. And so I think one of our goals for sure is to make sure that we double that number in the next 2 years, 2 to 3 years. And we have pledged to work very closely with whoever will be to make sure that this issue of corruption and transparency, that really for us is going to be a flagship topic.
Mm-hmm.
The event we do on Friday at 4 o'clock, we want to leave there with this idea of this civil and peaceable futures initiative. One of the things about naming things is that we don't want to name the thing the anti-corruption and transparency initiative. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because the word corruption is in the word.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to call it that. We want to have civil futures, which means less crime, and peaceable futures. And within the body of that, to have a civil future means that people will know how to behave with civility, which means stop lying and stealing and treating your electorate like they're your personal serfs, because that is how many politicians in the region treat their electorate. They want the largesse of coming out and giving away a free bulla and a free hard old bread and a free t-shirt with $100 wrap up into it and thrown on the ground. I mean, seriously? In the 21st century? And you want to call yourself leaders? No, 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 no. I think we have to help our people mature to recognizing that our politicians must be servants and must stop walking around like they are mini lords. To talk about class and princes, some of them see themselves as the princes of the Caribbean region. And if that's the case, then we have to have another revolution or evolution, because we're going to be the Rastafarian style, peace and love style, because we can't win with guns, these people. We have to take them out with peace and love and ultimate civility. Precisely. So thank you so much for attending. I want to make sure I've cleared all the chats. I've answered all the questions. And yes, and thank you, Caleb, for raising those issues. We hope you'll join us again. And certainly if you're not here for the rest of the week, fine. But make sure for sure on Friday with civil society. That's why we need the numbers to demonstrate to State Department that we're serious. We're coming. And by the way, we've invited Barbara Feinstein to attend. So tomorrow we'll start talking to her office to see if we can get her to come and close out the week, or if not, send somebody. And I was able to also touch base with the Assistant Secretary, Brian Nichols, as well, and tell him that we do want to hear from him at some point. As you heard earlier, he has Barbadian roots somewhere. One heel or one toe has a Barbadian root. So we're very excited about the week. Tomorrow, as you heard, will be census and education. Wednesday will be healthcare and disaster resilience. Thursday will be agribusiness, the blue economy, energy, and financial services. And we have a very special event on Thursday evening at 7 o'clock on food security. And so on Friday will be security, security, security. From border security to citizen security, to cyber security, to trafficking.
Human trafficking, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then to end up with our corruption and transparency, which we call it that to get people to show up. But initiative will not be called that. We want to call it a nice, sexy name that can represent the spirit of what we want to create. And somebody said it earlier today, we want to be a haven for peace in the region, in the Americas. We want the Caribbean to remain a zone of peace and love, and the Caribbean Sea to be a uniting force, not a force that divides us. With all that, I want to thank everyone for coming, for staying, and for being with us here through the day. You have certainly helped to make us feel that our work is not in vain.
Absolutely.
And for that, we're very grateful. Namaste. Irie, one love.
All right.
If you could stop the live stream, please. How do we stop the live stream?
Probably, what's her name needs to do it.
Well, Charmaine has to do it.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah. All right, well, we can talk later when it's not live.
If you could stop the live stream, please, Charmaine.